world feels like a new experience, and it really gives a specific mood to the player. So while we're working on these assets, our technical artists and our graphics programmers are working hard at giving us new tools and new technology to make more versatile shaders. And so when we need a new material like clean Terran paneling or Protoss glass or Protoss pipes, we'll do a bunch of tests and decide what looks really good and apply that to all the assets on the stage. And it makes these stages look more unique and feel more original to the user. So one of the biggest hurdles we have in doing environment art for RTS games is the procedural generation of cliffs and terrain. So we don't want the terrain, the cliffs, and the environment assets to look like different elements. We want them to feel less modular and feel more like one solid piece of artwork. So we made a conscious effort to create these custom cliff models to sort of make the world look a lot more natural and feel like one piece of art. So here's one of the more larger assets that you're going to encounter in the campaign. This was actually modeled as a high poly model and then baked down to a low poly mesh that you're going to see in game. It's got a bunch of really cool shapes and some fun effects on it. So here's the rock towers, the collapsible rock towers that you're going to encounter in multiplayer. We made all of our rocks in Heart of the Swarm as high poly meshes. We sculpted them and then baked them down to the low poly mesh that you see in game. And this gave a bunch of advantages. Number one, we can make these rocks look much more rigid, and since they have unique UVs, we can actually bake in the highlights and the shadows into each rock, so you don't lose any detail when it goes into the shadow, like you do with some of the rocks in Wings of Liberty. Here's a large Protoss structure that you're going to encounter in the campaign, and the effects in this asset actually would not have been possible without the new tech that we got for Heart of the Swarm. So on that note, I'm going to pass it over to Dominic, and he's going to talk about some of the new improvements to the engine.
Hello, BlizzCon. I'm Dominic Filion. I'm a lead software engineer for the graphics team on StarCraft 2. And what I want to share with you today is how the graphics in StarCraft 2 has actually evolved over time. Now, does anybody in the audience remember seeing screenshots of the first StarCraft in the alpha version? Anyone? Yeah. So if you remember, we got some of those here. Back in those days, everybody hated that. That was the left side picture, right? So everybody hated the picture. And we had to go back and actually change the look of it and actually make it look much better. So you might be wondering, did we go through the same process with StarCraft 2? And yes, we did indeed. So what I've been doing is for the past 6 years, I've been secretly stashing old builds of the game on my personal computer just for this day. And today, for the first time, I'm going to show you very old footage of how StarCraft 2 came about and how it looked in the early beginnings. So let's go back to the archives and see what that looks like. So we're going to go back a few months after I started working at Blizzard, and that was June 2005. This was build 385. This was the intro screen. And what you'll see is actually a little bit embarrassing because it's pretty primitive. So we started with the StarCraft 1 units. We didn't have any new units. This was the early versions of the models. The UI obviously needed a bit of alignment work to actually get it properly working. And we didn't have a sound engine yet, so no sound in the video. So all we did at that point was just getting the old StarCraft 1 stuff actually working. And the explosions were absolutely awesome. So if we move a bit further off, that was a year later, 2006. So now we actually put in something that would look more like a genuine model of the game. We had a cliff system that was put in, some basic lighting. We were kind of experimenting with the Terrans at this point. I think, let's see, what did we have? We were putting in some new units, if we're going to see in a few minutes. Yeah, it's not there, but we put in the particle systems, which would allow us to show actual blood coming out of nades and all that kind of stuff. So that was our first version of that. And then this was a couple months later. So this is when we actually started putting in new units. And some of the units you'll see today have actually been either heavily modified or they're actually gone from the game. So there's the Guardian in there, there's the Cobra that has changed, the Thor was much bigger back then. So we put in some special effects and some beams at that point, and the explosions were actually a little bit improved. At that point, where were we? I think, oh yeah, we started working on the Protoss, the early version of the pylon energy grid we put in. We had our first experiments. You can see some Dragoons that were still in the game back then. The Purifier, which is one of the units that we subsequently killed. And this is what Creep looks like when you put a bunch of programmers in a room without an artist to actually give them direction. But we had our first version of the Creep at a prototype stage at this point. Moving on, 2006 in October, this is when we put in the glow tech in the game and the high dynamic range colors. So we started putting beams as well and all sorts of cool effects and actually getting something that looks a lot closer to what we have today. What you see here is actually the old Archon, which was much bigger, and you could actually spawn it by just merging 3 Templars together. This is the mechanic we subsequently changed. So this is an actual much closer version of the Creep that we actually put in later. If you look in the video, you'll see it was actually reflective. This is something we changed afterwards because it was kind of slow. The Creep was pretty slow, and it was kind of distracting to actually see twice the same unit on the same screen. But at that point, we had really started to dial down the look of the Zerg and the Theron and the Protoss, and actually getting something that looks a lot closer to what we have today. Does anybody remember seeing the announcement of StarCraft 2 in Korea, like the early videos? This is the build that we use, and this was the first time we showed it to public. Blizzard actually shipped the whole team to Korea, and we had this huge stadium to actually see how the people would receive the game, and it was the most exciting moment of my life, really. This is July 2007. We put in foliage on the terrain, as you can see, so we were starting to really polish up the maps and actually give them a more finished look. This is when we put in the line of sight blockers, the first time we experimented with that mechanic. And then a few months later, October 2007, we put in scorch marks underneath buildings, kind of little polish items to really kind of anchor buildings to the terrain and actually give the final look for buildings. So at that point, we were actually quite close to the look of the game that we have today. But this was 2007, so you're probably wondering what the hell have these guys been doing in just 3 years between shipping? Well, we optimized the game, and we fixed some bugs, and we worked on the single-player campaign. That was 2008. And then in 2009, we optimized the game some more, and we fixed more bugs, and we worked on the campaign some more, until 12,000 builds later, we shipped version 1 of StarCraft that we have today. So let's move on to Swarm. Anyone here play on the lowest quality setting for graphics in StarCraft 2? Yeah, I hate you guys. So we're gonna improve that. It looks terrible. It looks terrible on low, but we're actually gonna improve that and not make it any slower than it is. We're actually trying to make that, and pro players love playing on low, so we're gonna actually focus on that. How many Zerg players do we have here today? So for you Creep lovers, we're going to actually improve the look of the Creep quite a bit. So as you can see, the Creep is actually growing on the buildings of your enemy. So you can actually infest his buildings and really show him you're really corrupting the heart of his base. Another thing we're going to be working on, there's a lot of units in the Zerg race that have snake-like movements. So we've built this animation system that will automatically generate all these snake movements. This is something the modders could use if you want to make your own train of Marines or whatever that looks like a snake. We also have rebuilt the physics engine from scratch. So now you can humiliate your enemy in a lot of various ways. In slow-mo, nice. So modders could also use the physics to do whatever they need. If, for example, you want to make a Marine Rain spell. It's raining men. So these are just some of the new features we're going to put in Swarm for you guys, and I really hope you enjoy them. Thanks.
Just give it all to me. Hi guys, I'm Phil Gonzalez, and I'm going to talk to you guys about what we've been doing on StarCraft Dota, or Blizzard Dota, I should say. Fired. Blizzard Dota is a lot of Blizzard Dota is a lot of fun for us because we focused on the military campaigns of StarCraft 2, and we were really focused on having large armies, massive amounts of units, and we weren't focused on heroes. So Blizzard Dota gives us the opportunity to shift that focus and actually play around on the other end of the spectrum, where we have really cool, polished hero characters, among other things. One of the things we're trying out, and you'll know there's a difference between the map from last year and this year, is that we're playing around with the cyber world idea. And the main idea is that this world is a gaming planet, and all the heroes are being abducted or incorporated to provide entertainment. The world we're trying to experiment with will also have a replication of terrain in areas we're familiar with, so maybe we'll see Sanctuary and other worlds from Blizzard universes. Another thing we changed from last year was the creeps. These guys are the numerous minions you'll be fighting as your heroes. We really wanted to imply a simplicity in their design. They're mass-produced, they're pieces of junk. You're going to kill them by the thousands, so who cares how intricate they are? Basically, we use really simple shapes, circles, pipes, stuff like that. We carried this theme on through some of the Mega Minions. This is going to replace the minion that we currently have, which I think is an Ultralisk in the BlizzCon build. But this will be there in that place, and it shares some of the same elements. It still looks like it's mass-produced, it's a simple thing to build, but it's also been kind of overbuilt in some areas to imply that this thing is going to wreck house. Take it out. Basically, the main goal with the minions is that they're kind of unremarkable. We want the heroes to be the focus of the game. We want the minions to be completely expendable. So going through with the Cyberworld theme, our main focus of Blizzard Dota is making the heroes shine and everything else just complement their goal in what you're doing in the game. Another interesting aspect of the Cyberworld is that we're going to be blending Blizzard worlds into it. For this build, we decided to bring in the ogres from the World of Warcraft universe, and so we have the mercenaries who have taken very quickly to the technology of the future, and they've equipped themselves with guns, armor, and the concept on the right you'll see is the Ogre King. It's not ready for BlizzCon yet, but he essentially is a gold pinata. If you find him on the map, kick the crap out of him, he's going to drop a ton of gold, and it's all going to go to your entire team. It's a cool new guy. These are the models we use for the Ogre minions. The cool thing about them is they're really economic models. We essentially made one ogre, and by switching out the weapons between ranged or melee weapons, we can get a lot more variety and utility out of these models. Another benefit is we have custom textures for each of these, and the textures make distinct differences on the models, such as tattoo patterns or even the completely different skin tone on the Ogre Mage. This is just a quick example movie, and if you're in the last panel you saw, the way the ogres work is they have camps around the map, and when you defeat them, they'll swear allegiance to your team, essentially replacing some of the mass-produced minions with sturdier, more honed fighters that will actually fight for you. It's pretty cool. And it takes a while. Just keep watching. Man. This is the Goblin Shop. We knew that we were going to be redoing the item shop, and we decided what would be a good fit for an item merchant. Naturally, the goblins came to mind once again. They're prolific, they'll pop up anywhere, they're like cockroaches or whatever. So basically, they've taken over the cyberworld's merchant needs, and they haven't really adapted that much. It's still the same shoddy goblin construction we know and love. It's a fun piece, and it really adds a lot of flavor to the serious tone of the cyberworld. This is a concept for Lord Order. When we showed Blizzard Dota last year, Instead of Lord Order, we had a King Tower as the final objective.